The notification appeared on my laptop at 2:47 p.m. Patrick Stone, employment status, terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out post-meeting. 9 Westbridge executives sat across the mahogany table, focused on my pitch. The room was silent except for my voice and the soft click of pens. No one else saw what I saw. My heart pounded, but I didn't flinch. I kept going, calmly detailing the implementation timeline for the $62 million contract I'd spent 7 months building from scratch. Phase 3 deployment begins in Q2, delivering a 31% increase in operational efficiency, I said, steady and professional. 7 months of relationship building, countless strategy sessions, weeks of custom proposals, all erased by one line of text while I stood there delivering the biggest deal of my career. I finished every slide, answered every question. When Westbridge's COO nodded at the final numbers, I closed my laptop with precision. "Thank you for your time," I said, shaking hands before walking out with the same confidence I'd entered with. They thought firing me mid-pitch would be clean, efficient, invisible. Instead, it destroyed everything they'd worked for. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. And let me know your thoughts on today's one in the comments. I read every message. I'm Patrick Stone. At 34, I'd been a senior account director at Corvin Solutions for 4.5 years when they decided I was expendable. That's how I lost my job in one sentence, and how Corvin lost millions. 3 months earlier, Derek Hoffman, VP of Strategy, asked me to design a full restructuring of client services. "You understand the landscape better than anyone," he said. I spent 4 weeks crafting an 83-page plan. Workflows, personnel, contingencies, timelines, everything needed to minimize disruption and maximize growth. When I handed it to him, he called it exceptional. 5 days later, Julian Foster, a newly hired director with polished confidence and sharp ambition, was presenting it as his own at an all-hands meeting. My name was gone. In its place, strategic framework developed by Julian Foster. He caught my eye and smirked. I gave nothing away, just nodded like it was news to me, while around me, colleagues praised his vision. Derek looked proud. That night I created a folder on my personal cloud, Ironclad Consulting. Just a placeholder, screenshots, timestamps, email threads, access logs, proof. I didn't know what Ironclad would become. I just knew I needed protection. The signs grew clearer. Sudden removal from email chains, editing rights revoked, and leadership on key accounts quietly reassigned. Then came Owen, my former trainee, fresh out of grad school, now being positioned to take over my accounts. "We'd like Owen to shadow you on Westbridge," my manager said casually. "Derek thinks he needs exposure to high-value clients." "Sure," I replied. "He's sharp." What I didn't say, I knew this wasn't mentorship, it was succession planning. The final clue came when HR called a role assessment. Claire Donnelly sat across from me, folder face down. "Standard procedure during restructuring," she said. "Is everyone being reviewed?" "Of course." Her eyes avoided mine. "Has Julian's role been assessed?" A flicker of discomfort. "Executive roles follow a different process," I nodded politely. Translation. I was being prepped for termination. That evening, I activated the next phase of my contingency plan. Using contract terms I'd helped draft, allowing employees to retain their own work for portfolio use, I backed up only what was mine: strategic frameworks, methodologies, and analytical models. No client data, no proprietary info, just my intellectual fingerprint. I also met with 2 former colleagues, Natalie from compliance and Simon from finance, far from the office. "I'm building something independent," I told them, "something that could stand on its own if needed." Natalie hesitated. "Are you asking us to compete with Corvin?" "Not yet," I said. "Just preparing, within my rights," Simon smiled. "You're expecting them to push you out." "I'm preparing for possibilities," I replied. By the morning of the Westbridge pitch, Ironclad Consulting was no longer just a folder. It had legal registration, an operational skeleton, and 2 trusted partners ready to go, just in case. The Westbridge contract had been mine from day one. The industrial giant needed a complete overhaul of its CRM system, a complex 14-country transformation I'd personally shaped by building trust with their execs and designing a solution that would boost customer experience and Corvin's recurring revenue. When I arrived for the final pitch, something felt off. Julian was in the prep room, quiet, observing. He'd never attended a Westbridge meeting before. "Derek wanted me to observe," he said with that practiced smile, "for continuity." I knew what that meant. They were already planning for a world without me. The presentation began at 10 a.m. sharp. I knew every slide, every number. Westbridge's team was locked in. Even their notoriously hard-to-please CFO was nodding at my projections. Then, on slide 12, the notification flashed, "Terminated." I finished the pitch with composure, shook hands, and walked out, straight to a small office suite I'd leased under Ironclad's name. Natalie and Simon were already there. My phase-active text had done its job. "They actually did it," Simon said. "During the Westbridge pitch," I confirmed. Natalie's eyes widened. "They fired you mid-$62 million deal? That's insane." "It's going to cost them more than they realize," I replied. Within 2 hours, Ironclad shifted from blueprint to business. We weren't starting from scratch. We were flipping switches on systems built in the shadows. Meanwhile, cracks appeared at Corvin. Westbridge's CTO, Robert Davison, emailed Derek. "We were impressed with Patrick Stone's presentation. Please confirm he'll lead implementation." Derek's reply, "Polished, corporate, Julian Foster will be your main contact." Robert fired back, "We prefer to work with Patrick Stone." I learned of the exchange through contacts still inside. The message was clear. Corvin had misunderstood the deal's true foundation. When Westbridge postponed the signing, citing internal review, everyone knew the truth. They were pulling back. While Corvin scrambled, I sent Robert a clean, calm email. "I'm no longer with Corvin. If Ironclad Consulting can support you in the future, I'd welcome the chance." No blame, no drama, just an open door. 30 minutes later, Robert replied. Not to me, but to Corvin's leadership. "We're suspending all contract discussions pending reassessment." Panic erupted at Corvin. Derek convened emergency meetings with Julian front and center, crafting concessions and talking points. But they missed the point entirely. This wasn't about features or pricing. It was about trust. And they'd shattered it in a single afternoon. For 2 weeks, Westbridge gave vague, polite delays. Then, Robert requested a meeting at Ironclad's office. Our space was modest but sharp, half a floor, efficiently furnished with live digital infrastructure. By the time he walked in, Ironclad looked like it had been here for years, not weeks. "I'll be direct, Patrick," he said once we were seated. "We've invested significant time in this project, and your understanding of our needs has been the primary reason we were prepared to move forward with Corvin." I nodded but stayed silent, letting him continue. "What happened?" he asked. "Why would they remove you from our account without transition or even notifying us?" "Corvin is going through internal restructuring," I replied neutrally. "They made personnel decisions they felt were appropriate." Robert studied me. "That's a diplomatic answer," I smiled slightly. "I prefer focusing on what's ahead rather than what's behind." "And what is ahead for Ironclad Consulting?" "We're a strategic implementation firm specializing in customer relationship transformations," I explained. "Our approach emphasizes deep client understanding, customized solutions, and flawless execution. We're small but focused, which allows us to be agile and fully committed to the projects we take on." What I didn't say, what I didn't need to say, was that Ironclad could deliver exactly what I'd promised Westbridge in my Corvin presentation. The intellectual architecture behind that proposal had come from my mind, not Corvin's systems. "Can you handle a project of our scale?" Robert asked the obvious question. "We have the expertise and frameworks ready," I assured him. "We're structured to scale resources as needed for implementation. What we don't compromise on is strategic oversight and direct accountability." 3 days later, Westbridge officially ended all discussions with Corvin and requested a formal proposal from Ironclad Consulting. When the news reached Corvin, the impact was devastating. Derek called me personally, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "What did you do, Patrick?" he demanded. "Did you sabotage us with Westbridge?" I informed them I was no longer with Corvin, I replied calmly. "Nothing more. They made their own decision based on that information." "You stole our client." "They were never your client, Derek. They were considering becoming one. They chose to work with the person they trusted to deliver results." "We'll pursue this legally," he threatened. "Your contract has non-compete clauses." "Which apply to existing clients, not prospective ones," I countered. "I helped draft those clauses. Remember? I know exactly what they cover and what they don't." The silence told me he recognized the trap. Corvin's own legal framework, which I'd helped shape, had created the very pathway I was now using. "This isn't finished," he said finally. "For me it is," I replied, and ended the call. The Westbridge account was just the beginning. Within 6 weeks, 2 other major prospects I'd been developing at Corvin also contacted Ironclad. Like Westbridge, they were more interested in working with the strategists they'd built relationships with than with a company logo. Meanwhile, Corvin was experiencing unexpected turbulence. Their client engagement metrics showed sharp declines. Without my ongoing relationship management, existing accounts were becoming less active, less engaged, and less invested in the Corvin ecosystem. Inside the company, rumors about my departure had spread. Some said I'd been recruited by a competitor. Others claimed I'd resigned over a dispute with leadership. Nobody seemed to know I'd been fired during a presentation, but everyone felt the gap created by my absence. Owen, the junior associate positioned as my replacement, was struggling under pressure he wasn't ready to handle. Julian, despite his charisma, lacked the deep client understanding that came from years of focused relationship building. The restructuring I'd originally designed was proceeding, but poorly. Without the nuanced approach I'd outlined, the integration was creating conflict rather than synergy. Teams that should have been collaborating were competing for resources. 4 months after my termination, Corvin lost another major account, not to Ironclad, but to a different competitor. The client cited changes in strategic support as their reason for leaving. 2 weeks later, a third account announced they were reconsidering their partnership. The dominoes were falling. Not because I was actively pushing them over, but because Corvin had removed the person who'd been keeping them standing. Ironclad, meanwhile, was growing with controlled precision. We hired selectively, bringing on professionals who shared our commitment to strategic excellence and client-focused solutions. Our reputation spread through the industry, not through marketing, but through results. Westbridge's transformation was proceeding ahead of schedule and under budget. 8 months after my termination, Ironclad and Corvin found themselves competing for a significant new account, a global logistics company seeking to modernize their customer engagement platform. It was the kind of high-profile project that could establish Ironclad as a major industry player. Final presentations were scheduled for the same afternoon. Corvin sent Julian, now promoted to VP of Strategic Services, along with a team of 5 specialists. Ironclad sent me, Natalie, and our newly hired operations director. We presented second, entering the conference room just as the Corvin team was exiting. Julian's eyes met mine briefly. His confident smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered and nodded professionally. I returned the nod and continued into the room without breaking stride. Our presentation was everything Corvin's wasn't: focused, substantive, and precisely aligned with the client's specific needs. We didn't overwhelm them with buzzwords or impressive-sounding jargon. We simply demonstrated with calm authority that we understood their challenges and had practical frameworks for addressing them. We won the account, not because of any lingering resentment toward Corvin, but because Ironclad was simply better at delivering what this client needed. The news sent shockwaves through Corvin. Losing Westbridge had been dismissed as an anomaly. Losing to Ironclad in direct competition was different. It was a market judgment on the relative value of the two companies. 10 days later, I received an unexpected message from Owen, my former mentee and supposed replacement. "Can we talk? There are things happening at Corvin you should know about." We met at a quiet coffee shop. Owen looked exhausted, the kind of deep tiredness that comes from trying to succeed in an impossible situation. "It's falling apart," he said once we sat down. "The restructuring is a disaster. Departments aren't coordinating, projects are stalling, clients are frustrated." I sipped my coffee, listening. "Julian is blaming everyone except himself," Owen continued. "He keeps saying the framework is solid, but execution is flawed. But everyone knows the framework itself has problems that weren't in your original design." "How do you know about my original design?" I asked. Owen gave me a knowing look. "People talk, Patrick. Those of us who worked with you recognize your thinking. We can see where your work has been altered, and not for the better." I considered this. "Why are you telling me?" He looked down. "Because I'm leaving, Corvin. Several of us are. And I wanted your advice on what to do next." I studied him. He had potential, and he'd clearly learned something about corporate loyalty in recent months. "Send me your resume," I said. "Ironclad is growing. We might have a place for someone with your insights." 3 weeks later, Owen joined Ironclad as a senior client strategist. He brought not only his talents, but also insights into Corvin's increasingly desperate attempts to stabilize. Derek had initiated a company-wide renewal program, essentially admitting the restructuring wasn't working. Julian had been quietly moved from VP of Strategic Services to a newly created role in Innovation Development, a title with less client contact and more internal focus. Claire from HR had left entirely, replaced by a turnaround specialist. 11 months after my termination, the final blow fell. Corvin's board called an emergency meeting and voted to remove Derek as VP of Strategy. The official statement cited strategic misalignment, but the financial data told the real story. Client retention had dropped 27%. New acquisitions were down 41%. The company's valuation had fallen to its lowest point in 6 years. Julian left the company shortly after. No announcement, no farewell, just another name quietly erased, much like mine had been from the restructuring proposal that started everything. I didn't celebrate these developments. There was no satisfaction in watching a company where I'd invested years of my career implode. Good people still worked there, people who had nothing to do with the decisions that led to my termination. Instead, I focused on building Ironclad into everything Corvin could have been, but chose not to be. A company valuing strategic thinking, respecting intellectual contribution, and placing client needs at the center of every decision. 1 year to the day after that notification appeared on my screen, I walked into Ironclad's expanded headquarters. We'd outgrown our original space and moved to a full suite in the financial district. The reception area featured a simple but elegant sign, the Ironclad logo with my name beneath it as founder and CEO. Westbridge's implementation had been completed successfully, on time and under budget. They'd already contracted us for 3 additional projects. The logistics company's platform modernization had exceeded all benchmarks, becoming a case study in effective transformation. Ironclad now employed 32 people, including 9 former Corvin staff who joined us seeking a more merit-based environment. Standing in that reception area, I reflected on the journey. I'd never sought revenge against Corvin. I'd never publicly criticized them or revealed the circumstances of my departure. I'd simply built something better, something that honored strategic thinking and client relationships rather than internal politics and credit stealing. In the end, that was more devastating to Corvin than any revenge could have been. They hadn't just lost an employee when they fired me mid-presentation. They'd lost their future. I was mid-sentence when HR terminated me in front of 9 executives. I'd spent 7 months building that deal. They ended it in 1 notification. They thought silencing me would eliminate my influence. Instead, it eliminated their entire pipeline. Because I'd already built something they couldn't touch. My reputation, my relationships, and my strategic vision. Those things didn't belong to Corvin. They never had. They belonged to me. When I walked out of that conference room with my dignity intact, I wasn't ending my career. I was beginning its next, better chapter. My name is Patrick Stone, founder and CEO of Ironclad Consulting, and this is just the beginning of our story. I sometimes think about that notification sliding across my screen. Employment status terminated. 7 words meant to end something. Instead, they started everything that followed. The irony isn't lost on me. In trying to silence me, Corvin gave me the push. I needed to find my true voice. In trying to claim my work as theirs, they freed me to create something authentically mine. In firing me during my greatest professional moment, they unwittingly launched me toward even greater success. I never needed to fight them or expose them or destroy them. They did that themselves the moment they decided I was expendable while my work was not. All I needed to do was walk away, taking with me the one thing they couldn't claim in their termination notice: my mind. Everything else followed naturally. 2 years have passed since that day. Ironclad has grown to 47 staff members with offices in 4 cities. Corvin still exists, but in diminished form, having been partially acquired by a larger competitor who valued their client list more than their operational structure. Derek occasionally appears at industry events, always careful to avoid direct contact with me. Julian has reinvented himself at a startup on the opposite coast, his online profile carefully vague about specific dates regarding his time at Corvin. As for me, I no longer define myself in opposition to them. Ironclad has its own identity now, its own culture, and its own reputation in the market. We're known for strategic excellence, flawless implementation, and unwavering client focus, all values I once tried to instill at Corvin, now flourishing in better soil. The lesson, I suppose, is that true power doesn't reside in titles or organizational authority. It resides in the value you create and the relationships you build. Those things can't be taken from you with a termination notice, no matter how abruptly it arrives. They can only be carried forward, transforming from potential into kinetic force when the constraints of an unsuitable environment are suddenly removed. I was mid-sentence when HR fired me. I finished that sentence, and then I started writing an entirely new story, one where I held the pen. That's the thing about trying to silence someone who truly has something to say. The voice always finds a way to be heard, sometimes more powerfully than before. In firing me, Corvin didn't end my influence, they amplified it, and I didn't need to say a single word about what they did. I simply had to succeed where they were beginning to fail. That has been satisfaction enough. The most rewarding part isn't watching Corvin struggle or seeing former colleagues seek positions at Ironclad. It's building something that embodies my values without compromise. Creating a company where strategic thinking is valued, where credit is given appropriately, and where success is measured by client outcomes rather than internal politics. In a way, I should thank them for that notification 2 years ago. Without it, I might still be fighting those internal battles, trying to change a culture resistant to the very values that now define Ironclad. Instead, I'm free to lead according to my own vision, surrounded by people who share that vision. Not because they fear consequences, but because they genuinely believe in our approach. That freedom is worth far more than the temporary discomfort of unexpected termination. So if there's a moral to this story, perhaps it's this. Sometimes being silenced is the universe's way of telling you you've been speaking in the wrong room all along. Find the right room, or build it yourself, and your voice will not only return, but also resonate more powerfully than you ever imagined possible. I built Ironclad not to compete with Corvin, but to create what Corvin could never become. A company where strategy isn't just a department, but a mindset. Where client relationships aren't just accounts, but partnerships. Where intellectual contribution isn't something to be claimed, but something to be cultivated. That clarity of purpose has been our true advantage. In the end, HR didn't fire me. They freed me. And in trying to ensure I exited their systems, they unwittingly launched me into creating a better one. That notification was meant to be an ending. Instead, it was the beginning of everything that mattered. My name is Patrick Stone, and this is my company, built with my mind, guided by my values, successful on my terms. Nobody can take that away with a 7-word message. Nobody ever will.